Welcome! In this series of videos, we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will continue our project to create our own web browser by adding image support. This was our application at the end of the last video. We have made a start on creating our own Lite browser. The browser currently supports a number of HTML tags. It also supports tabs on the browser control itself. We can support now up to 10 tabs. In today's video, we're going to do what is common with each release. We're going to review the previous release to fix any bugs or features that have been encountered, and we're going to add something new. The something new we're going to add today is the ability to support the image tag, so the images, JPEGs and PNG files can be displayed on the browser. So let's have a look at our code. In order to support this new functionality, we're going to bring in some more library files. One to handle common strings, and one to allow us to load JPEGs or PNG files into our graphics control. And these are our new include files added into the code. We'll cover the functions within these files when we get to that point in the code. First of all, I want to fix something with the tab controls. If we have a look at the application and click on the plus tab, add some new tabs. We can add up to 10 tabs. However, only 9 of them are of use to the user, the 10th tab being the plus sign. As we said, we're going to allow the user to use 10 tabs. We want to increase the number of tabs by 1. We can do that quite easily by increasing the constant we've got that controls the number of tabs. So now we support 11 tabs, 10 the user can access and 1 to add additional tabs. Once the number of tabs on screen reaches 11, no more tabs can be added. One thing we did in the last video was to redimension arrays. Since we're going to have a fixed number of tabs the user can access, we can set this right when the program begins to have a maximum of 11 tabs. So if we have a look in the PB main function, we'll see here this is where we're dimensioning the URLs array. This is the array that holds the URL for each of the tabs. We also have a tab handles array, so we're going to do exactly the same with it. We will redimension that array to be the number of tabs set in our max tabs constant. And if we have a look in our callback function, our event handler, in here we had a line of code which is redimensioning the tab handles array to be 2 elements. Since we've now dimensioned this to be the full number of tabs, we no longer need this line of code. So by forcing the array to have a fixed number of elements, we have eliminated one line of code. In the drag and drop section of our event handler, there's a piece of code we'll need to move. In this section of code, we update the graphics control with the single file that has been dragged in to our graphics control. This is done using the render the HTML function. And having rendered the HTML, we then store the URL in our URL array. I'm going to amend this slightly so that we store the URL before we render the page. This will allow us to pick up the path of any image file that the user has within the HTML file. So we will move this section up above this section, like so. And I'm going to make a call in here to the clear graphics control function. This function clears out the graphics control ready for new content, and it's ideal to do this before re-rendering a page. If we try running our application now, and we add some more tabs, we find we have a problem here. Clicking on the plus tab is not adding a new tab control. This is because we now have a fixed number of tabs in the tab array. So we'll need to amend our code to cope with this. This will be in the tab control selection change event within our event handler, our callback function. In here, currently we pick the top page number by the upper bounding of our tab handles array. Since we now have our tab handles array set to be 11 elements, this will always return the value 11, so this will need to change. What we can do though is use the tab get text command to pick up the text on the tab the user has clicked on. If the value in the text of the tab is a plus sign, then we're obviously clicking on the plus tab. So there is our line of code to pick up the title on the currently selected tab. And we're testing to see if it's the value plus. So we now need to test if we add 1 to the current tab number, will this be greater than or less than the maximum number of tabs? So we also have to add an extra variable. We've created a tab title variable, so we'll add that at the beginning of our function. So before we test this out, there's a couple other changes I want to make to the events in here. We've already put one call to the Clear Graphics control function. There's a couple other places that this will be needed. If we look first of all at the size event, before we re-render the HTML, we'll want to run Clear Graphics control. And also within the ID OK event, we'll want to do exactly the same before we render the HTML. So now that we have that in place, let's try rerunning the application to see if we've fixed our problem. If we click on the plus now, we are now getting the new tabs being created. If we go right to the end, we can now see we now have 10 usable tabs for the user and 1 plus tab at the end, which the user can no longer click on. And if we right click on one of the tabs, we can close it down quite happily, until we get back to the Home tab. So we now appear to have fixed that issue. So next we need to make changes to support the image control. So we will need an HTML page which has an embedded image. So within our HTML pages folder, I've added 2 additional files, a page 3 HTML file and a PNG file. The PNG file is showing a small image. And if we double click on page 3 to open up in a browser window, so we will see that this is what we want to display inside our browser control. We want the text page 3 at the top, followed by the image, and followed by the remainder of the text. So how can we support this within our code? If we have a look at the text in Notepad, we will see there is our image tag, followed by src for source, and then just the name of the PNG file. As you will see, we have just given the name of the file. There is no pathing embedded within it. We'll cover pathing in a later video. So in this case, the PNG file is in the same folder as the HTML file. So we'll need to add support for IMG tags. So back to the code. One thing we haven't set up in the code so far is to work out where the current position of the next thing to be printed on the browser control is. This is something we'll need to do at some point, so we may as well do it now. So we've added 2 new global variables, a long X and a long Y. These are going to be our X and Y print locations. So before we support the image tag, let's remove a couple bits of debug code. When we run the application at the moment, we're getting 2 lines of debug code at the top of our browser control. The words return pressed and the path, and HTML formatting OK. So we're going to remove that from the code so those no longer print out. And this is in the render the HTML function. So for the moment, we'll just comment this line of code out. And this one here. Should the HTML be invalid, we'll leave this command in. And while we're in here, before we load the HTML file, we'll make another call to our clear graphics control. So we now need to look at the render HTML tags function. This is the heart of our render engine that handles each of the tags. Each of the HTML tags is handled within this function. So we're going to add on a new case statement to support the img tag. So for the start of the image tag, we're testing to make sure we're inside the body section of the HTML. The attributes variable should already have been populated. And we're using the tab get select command to pick up the tab the user has actually selected. So as this is something new, we're going to have to create a new function to allow the display of this image on the control. So we're creating a new function called displayImage, and we're passing it the dialog handle, the attributes we have already populated, and the tab the user has selected. So here we have created the skeleton of our new function taking its 3 parameters. We'll need a number of local variables here to keep track of what we're actually doing. And this function is going to make use of one of the functions within the libraries we have added today. The image we're attempting to load is a PNG file. But PNGs cannot be directly loaded into a graphics control. We need to convert them to a bitmap. And the function within our new library will perform that for us. So within our attributes is the src equals command, giving us possibly the path and definitely the name of the file to load. So we'll first work out its starting position just so we can get the path and name of the file. So we can work out the starting position using the inString command. And we're using a temporary variable to be populated using $. This will allow us to pick up the actual path and name of the file. And our final task is to populate the source variable using the parse command to get the content within the double quotes. As I said earlier, the image path may be relative to the HTML page. We'll cover that in a later video, but for the moment, we just want the ending part of our path, the name of the file. So our next task is to pick up the full HTML path of the tab currently selected. We're now getting that out of the URLs array. And we're using the parse count command to count how many slashes are in the path. Now this at the moment assumes that the path is a local one to the user's machine. We'll be handling paths on web pages separately in another video. Then we're decrementing this value by 1, and we're picking up the last part, in which case is the name of the file. Now that we have the name of the file, which in this case should be nas.png, so we can now use the funload image file command in our new library to load this into a bitmap. So this function takes a number of parameters. First of all is the path and name of our file. Secondly, we are passing back from this function the width and the height of the image, and we're also passing back the handle to the bitmap we have populated. However, there's one thing we'll have to watch in here. Because the function load image file is redirecting graphics operations using the graphics attach command to the bitmap, we have to reattach to our graphics control on the screen, otherwise nothing will appear. Now that we have reattached to our graphics control, we can now copy the populated bitmap to our screen. So the question is, where exactly on our graphics control do we position this bitmap? As you may remember earlier, we created 2 global variables, long X and long Y. These are going to be set for the next available position for printing. So we will use those 2 variables to position our graphic on the graphics control by using the graphic copy command and our X and Y coordinates as parameters. So having positioned our graphic on the screen, we now need to pick up where the next available position is. We can do that using the graphic get pos command. This will populate the global X and Y coordinates. And I'm going to add onto the Y coordinate the height of our image. so that X and Y now point to the next available space. We can then free up the space used in the bitmap, and we can redraw the graphics control for the user. So let's try running the application now to see how close we are. As you will remember, page 3 is the one with the embedded graphics control. Well, we have our graphic on the screen, but it's appearing at the top left-hand corner, and it's overwriting some of the text that was originally there. So we have a little bit more work to do. We have set the X and Y coordinates having printed the graphic on the graphics control. However, we haven't set the X and Y coordinates anywhere else in the application, specifically for the text that's appearing on the screen. So let's go back to the code and set that up. So there's a function within the application called print data, where we're printing text to the graphics control. Let's have a look at that function. So here is a line of code which is printing text to the graphics control, and another line further down doing exactly the same job where there are no line breaks. What we want to do in this section is determine the position to print, to set it, and then to get the value after it's been printed. So we can do that by using the graphics setPosition command to set the position to print, printing the text, and then getting the position and storing the values in the global X and Y variables. And we'll do exactly the same logic in this section here, which handles where there are no line breaks. So that should complete this function for printing text to the graphics control. There is one further change we'll need to make. When the user loads a new HTML file, they may well be loading it into a tab which had a file before, so we'll need to reset those X and Y coordinates back to 0. As when the user loads a new HTML page, we call the clear graphics control command, so this is a logical place to put this piece of code. So here we are resetting the global X and global Y values to 0. So before we do our final testing, there's one further change we'll need to make when the user closes a tab. As in our previous video, we were doing a redim preserve command to redimension arrays every time the user removed a tab. So let's have a look at the callback function of the very small dialog that handles the closed tabs. In here we have a piece of logic which handles clicking on the Close Tab button. As you can see in here, this is where the arrays are redimensioned. These two lines of code need to come out. And the tab selected, test up here, needs to be changed to test on the max tab constant. So with all that in place, let's try running our application once more to see if we've fixed all the problems. Well, if we drag in page 3, we can see we're getting the page 3 header, the image, and the rest of the text. So if we drag in page 2 on top of it, it displays quite happily. And let's add a new page and drag in page 1, add a new page and drag in page 3. So we can now see it's supporting HTML files with both images and no images in place. This is the very beginnings of image handling. We're not at the moment supporting any additional attributes, for example height and width, on the image tag, but we'll do that in a later video. Hopefully you'll find this code useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.